everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Nadya, and I'm the co-founder of Aconite, a mixed reality storytelling platform. Let's take a moment to define mixed reality. AR and VR are intrinsically immersive on account of the rich sensory data involved, but there's more to immersion than larger-than-life graphics. Even the most impressive, beautifully rendered virtual world becomes boring if there's nothing for people to do in it. There are many techniques for making a person feel like they're part of the story. They come to us from a diverse set of traditions, including live-action role-playing, psychogeography, escape rooms, alternate reality games, and immersive theater, to name just a few. Mixed reality includes AR and VR, but it's bigger than that. It's any storytelling technique that blurs the line between reality and fiction. When my co-founder, Star, who's sitting right here, and I launched the company last fall, it was a more innocent time. Then the election happened. We were thrust into a world of fake news and alternative facts, an all-out war on reality waged on an institutional level. So the question I want to ask today is, what is the responsibility of mixed reality architects, game designers, storytellers, immersive journalists, the people in this room, in an era where reality is constantly getting mixed up for the wrong reasons across unpredictable contexts? To answer this question, I started thinking a lot about Russia. Growing up in the Soviet Union, I had what you could call a mixed reality childhood. One time, I went outside to find a crashed, abandoned, overturned public city bus just lying there. It was the best playground I ever had. A few weeks later, all the dumpsters in our neighborhood were inexplicably filled with gas masks. No one knew where they came from or why they were discarded. We put them on and ran around, terrorizing the neighborhood, pretending to be wild elephants. A few months later, Chernobyl blew up. The government didn't tell anyone. My mom made me stay indoors for a week. She worked in a hospital and knew things that other people didn't know. Like, for example, another time, there was an epidemic of poisoned watermelons being sold in stores. The government didn't acknowledge it. The news didn't warn people about it. No recalls were issued. But the people working in the hospitals knew. And they did what they could to combat the pervasive lie that everything was okay and that the USSR could do no wrong. There's a lot we can learn from uses and abuses of mixed reality techniques by and in opposition to authoritarian regimes. And that's largely what this talk is about. Russian people were always adept at mapping new layers of reality on top of existing ones. It's in our DNA. You can see it in our oldest fairy tales. As Francis Spufford writes in his book, The Red Plenty, real Russia's fields grew scragging crops of buckwheat and rye. Story Russia had magical tablecloths, serving feasts without end. Real Russia's roads were mud and ruts. Story Russia abounded in tools of joyful velocity, flying carpets, genies of the rushing air, horses that scarcely bent the grass they galloped on. The stories dreamed away reality's defects. The dream of abundance found in Russian fairy tales remained a fixture of the Soviet government's manufactured reality. In 1959, Nikita Khrushchev told a crowd at Lenin Stadium, "In our day, the dreams expressed in fairy tales are being translated into reality by man's own hands." And it seemed that the fairy tales were coming true. The Russian word for magic carpet was now an ordinary word for airplane, and radios promised that just next year there would be tablecloths that dispensed infinite food. For decades leading up to this, the only officially sanctioned art style in Russia was socialist realism. It was an art that showed Soviet citizens how they should behave. Lenin said that the aim of this art style was to create an entirely new type of person. Stalin called socialist realist artists engineers of the human soul. So what do pictures of tractors have to do with modern-day mixed reality? Soviet propaganda modeled for Soviet citizens a proper behavior that the government desired. The didactic tools that we have today at our disposal do the same thing within simulated realities in a much more potent way. As architects of virtual worlds, we need to understand that every facet of the experiences we create, the story world that we craft, the game mechanics we introduce, the player interaction culture that we foster, informs our users' behaviors and identities. As the tech becomes more lifelike and more seamlessly integrated into everyday life, the systems that we build have the potential to deeply transform our users. And as larger groups of networked players experience our worlds, as group behavior patterns emerge based on our designs, it's imperative that we design responsibly. People in a group are more impressionable than one player alone, and large groups of people are capable of all sorts of things, good and bad. Mixed reality was not always a form of social control in the USSR. Sometimes it was a form of resistance. It's no coincidence that one of Russia's most groundbreaking works of protest literature, The Master and Margarita, has fractured reality as one of its central themes. In this book, the devil, disguised as a traveling magician and accompanied by a disreputable entourage that includes a talking, vodka-swilling black cat, arrives unexpectedly in Moscow, in a city that's lost its belief in God, the devil, and fairy tales. The devil stages a black magic show that thrusts the audience unwillingly into an alternate reality in which your lives stop making sense. In the process, many of the book's characters uncover their true path in life, rather than the one prescribed for them by their oppressive circumstances. Perhaps the most striking example of mixed reality's power to subvert authority happened in Yugoslavia. A few years before the Bosnian War began, a Slovenian art collective called the Neue Slovenske Kunst began issuing passports to what they called the NSK state. The NSK conferred the status of a state not to a place, but to the collective minds of its inhabitants. In the words of the NSK, it's a state in time, a state without territory and national borders, a sort of spiritual state. People could get passports to the NSK at art events or at concerts by Laibach, NSK's musical wing. The NSK state's slogan was, "Art is a fanaticism that demands diplomacy." When all hell broke loose in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was a period when people with Bosnian passports were not being allowed out of the war zone. There are reports of cases when a border official, whether sympathetic, drunk, bribed, or themselves an NSK citizen, stamped people's NSK passports at checkpoints, waving them through, allowing them to escape. This piece of paper, representing an imaginary state, saved lives when official government documents failed. We're living in a time when such abstractions are increasingly reshaping the physical world. From World of Warcraft gold farms in the developing world to swarms of Pokemon Go players trespassing on federal property, games are terraforming our world. Looking back, the propaganda of the USSR seems so quaint now. The iconography of the Soviet regime, which once stole millions of hearts and minds, is now a kitschy source of amusement, a cardboard cliché upon which countless fictitious dystopias are patterned. In order for state-sanctioned mixed reality to remain effective, following the Cold War, the apparatus had to adapt. Enter Vladislav Surkov, the great cardinal of the Kremlin, a man widely regarded as the architect of the modern Russian political system. Since assuming office in 1999, Surkov has been the showrunner of Russia's reality. He personally curated what was allowed on Russian television, bringing in neurolinguistic programmers and importing top Western reality TV producers to create a well-oiled propaganda machine. He's created fake opposition parties and even funded real ones, making sure that they got ample screen time to create the illusion of dissent. At the same time, he funded pro-Kremlin motorcycle gangs and fascist youth groups known for burning books and disrupting allegedly degenerate art performances, which is interesting because Surkov himself comes from the avant-garde art world. This guy keeps a framed photo of Borges in front of a set of encyclopedias in his office. He writes lyrics for rock bands and essays on conceptual art. For many years, he studied to be a theater director. Many describe his political strategy, and by extension, all of Russian mass media, as just that, a confounding blend of theater and politics that keeps the public constantly off balance, rendering all political movements absurd and painting Russia's president as the fatherly, stabilizing, unshakable focal point amidst ideological chaos. Surkov's most recent public performance was the destabilization of Ukraine. A few days before Crimea was annexed, Surkov published a short science fiction story under a pseudonym. The story was called Without Sky, and it described a concept called nonlinear warfare, an aimless, ceaseless conflict, not between geopolitical forces, but between provinces, cities, classes, professions, and genders, in which people aren't always sure exactly what they're fighting for or why, with groups frequently switching allegiances, often mid-battle. It's a sinister inversion of asymmetrical game design, a concept fundamental to crafting rich mixed reality games. Fusion VR recently did a great educational segment on this, which I highly recommend. In symmetrical games like chess, both players have identical actions available to them in order to win. The black pieces move exactly like the white pieces, etc. In asymmetrical design, players aren't all using the same set of mechanics. This type of design promotes teamwork, supports different play styles, and creates a richer set of player choices. I'd like to end this talk with one last game design concept called the magic circle. In game design theory, the magic circle is a liminal space, either physical or imaginary, that's set aside for play. By entering the magic circle, ordinary people assume extraordinary identities, and real-world events take on special meanings. For example, kicking a ball becomes scoring a point. It's a place of immersion, narration, catharsis, and dreams. I grew up in a magic circle. When I was little, my parents found these typewritten, carbon-copied, hand-bound translations of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which had not been approved by the government for translation, circulating around their neighborhood. They fell in love with Tolkien's Middle-earth. Together with some neighbors, they started organizing a club for Tolkien fans to compare notes. One day, they just spontaneously decided to start dressing up as the characters and collaboratively writing poetry. Together, that gave their characters new adventures in Middle-earth. Essentially, they spontaneously came up with live-action role-playing behind the Iron Curtain, at the same time that it was getting popular in the West. The house was always full of guitar music and candles and the smell of cooking soup. And in the summer, there were campfires and dancing. My dad was Aragorn, my mom was Arwen, and I was their little elf child. My mom would later tell me that doing this helped her. My nose just disappeared. I guess I'll do this from memory. My mom told me that doing this helped her escape Russia's harsh, oppressive society. When I read a book, I was escaping alone, she told me. But by role-playing, we were all escaping together. This is a map that she and her friends drew, reconstructing Middle-earth from text that they translated together. That word, escape, it's interesting. We think of escapism as something frivolous, immature. But something interesting happened in the course of this club's experience. One day, one of the women in the group announced that she was going to start playing as a male character. And everyone reacted to that by saying, sure, why not? Sounds good to us. That's the power of a magic circle. Russia was and continues to be a deeply homophobic, transphobic place. If you were gay in Russia, you'd be fired from your job, you lost your friends, you were considered sick, basically. And even my dissident parents at the time were not immune to this type of thinking. Despite this, gameplay became a safe space for my parents and their friends to try something new. This woman took on a male name, Faramir, but she kept female pronouns. And then something even more extraordinary happened. She began having an in-character, in-game romance with another woman in their Tolkien fan club. It was very chaste. They wrote each other tender poetry, talking about questing together. I've read some of it. It's beautiful. So within the magic circle of the game, these two women were able to have a loving same-sex relationship with community support at a time when that should have been impossible in Russia. Magic circles transform us. Thanks to AR, VR, and our internet-connected pocket supercomputers, we have the chance to draw magic circles larger than ever before. As my friend Adam Flynn puts it, any sufficiently large magic circle is indistinguishable from reality. The largest magic circles ever drawn were by governments and promoted xenophobia and ignorance. But I think we can do better and fight back by drawing even larger circles grounded in agency, empathy, curiosity, and kindness. What new experiments, what economic models, social hierarchies, ways of being human together. Can we try? I don't know the answer yet, but I'm excited to find out with all of you. Thank you.